Hey, how are you, Rachel?
Good. I'm good.
Good to see you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making time in your schedule up from your trip from Houston.
Yeah,
right?
Not so bad. Thank you for having me.
How's it feel to be back out on the road, or have you been back out on the road for a while?
So I've not been back on the road. This was my impetus for the debut of my work travel career. Prior to recording, you heard the video of my daughter and her. I have a 3-year-old daughter and her displeasure with waking up.
I think displeasure was the polite way to
yeah. I mean,
that.
she was full out pissed.
Hysterical,
Let's be real. Let's be real. I think for women especially who've been working from home, to children who don't understand what we're doing behind a computer, it's almost like we're stay-at-home moms. And so the minute you leave, it's just kind of there's definitely some disruption going on. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm so glad you scheduled this as a 3-day interview. So right?
Yes, no, my pleasure. Right. I know we all want to get out. How did it feel though? Being back in person, like I know you had a couple meetings in person. Yeah. Was it good? Like, did it feel like
it's great.
Home again?
Yes, I'm a people person, so there's just so many things you cannot get from behind a Zoom screen.
Oh, I'm so happy. It's so refreshing to hear that because I've felt that for so long, and I didn't know if everybody. I mean, I presume salespeople were all kind of itching, right, to get out.
Yes.
But I didn't know if there was a certain, there might be a certain subset of people that are just like, no, this is cool. I'm happy to do this forever. But me, I'm just like, please let me out. Like a cannon, ready to fire.
I didn't even mind, and being in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where I now know Fort Worth and Dallas are two totally separate cities. You cannot think like one's a 10-minute drive from the other. Yeah, it's very confusing for people from out of state. But I got to tell you, I just love being on the open road. It was so nice to have somewhere to drive.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, if you like driving, the Metroplex will definitely accommodate you for driving. Because, we talked about, oh, yeah, you're 5 minutes away from where I am. I was probably 15 minutes. But I tend to downplay because it's just, you get just used to highways, right? It's like everywhere you go is 20 minutes or 30 minutes away.
I am hoping that the greater part of Texas does stay home because how nice has it been without all the crazy traffic? Yeah,
I know, right? I remember I was that guy that was still going out last year. And working in a space like this, and I remember empty highways, literally highways that would be bumper to bumper traffic. I'm going 100 miles an hour and going this is fun, but this is also is this I Am Legend, is this the precursor to when everything, falls apart in apocalypse? But anyways, I'm kind of happy people are out again, but not to divulge too much into that. The one thing I do want to talk to you about, I know you already know what I'm going to say. You recommended to me the Magic Merlin Sleep Suit. So for those of people out there who don't know what that is, please, if you don't mind sharing.
It's almost like you turn your infant into the Michelin Man. You put them in this spacesuit looking thing, and for new parents out there who happen to be listening, who have a child and sleep is not something you're getting a lot of, it becomes almost an obsession as far as how do I get this small little thing that's entered my house to sleep more than 4 hours. And this Magic Merlin suit is magic. You just stick them in this little puffy thing. They look cute as can be.
Yeah.
And, for those that like it, they love it. And
well, so you actually helped my wife and I tremendously because I think we were going back, how did we originally connect? And then it came, I think you mentioned I think I recommended the Magic Merlin Sleep Suit to you 3 years ago. And I'm like, okay. But so Brooklyn at the time, I don't remember, 4 or 5 months old, but we threw her in that little thing. And it's funny because it's also like a measuring stick because when you put them in it at first, it swallows them up. And then you slowly see their legs and arms creeping out as they're growing. But it was a lifesaver. Honestly,
well, I'm glad I gave you guys hopefully a little bit of sleep because that's what you need when you have an infant.
Well, and then when Bash came around, we're like, Merlin suit for sure.
Yeah.
You got to go get one. So anyways, thank you for that. And
You're
I appreciate
welcome.
That was the reason why we connected originally. That's obviously not what we're going to talk about today. But so thanks for coming on. Rachel, if you don't mind, I know you've been at EHIM for nearly 20 years right now. Yeah. So, it won't be as long to talk about your work career, I think, of your stops, but tell us who you are personally and professionally and just kind of bring everybody up to speed with Rachel Strauss.
Sure. So I think we've already covered the personally. I'm a proud mom. I love my babies. I've gotten to spend a lot of time with them in these last 12 months. So that's a perk of, I guess, the silver lining of this COVID era. But professionally, I'm Director of Business Development for EHIM. We are a pharmacy benefit manager headquartered in Detroit. We've been around almost 35 years. I can't believe next year will be our 35th anniversary. I guess you could say at this point I'm a lifer. I believe in what the company does. I've worn a lot of hats within the organization. I started in underwriting, so I kind of
really? Cool.
I did, yeah. And from there kind of evolved naturally because I'm a people person into sales and, truly business development is kind of a sales role with a bigger
Well,
title.
when you were doing the underwriting, because underwriting naturally, people that gravitate to that like to be not customer facing, let's say that. So was there were you doing some speaking with the customer?
Yeah,
at that point?
so it was early in my career. We didn't have a lot of, we were growing. We
Sure.
were in growth mode. I was probably, I think, employee number 11 or 12. And when the underwriter went on an extended vacation for a honeymoon, they needed somebody who had an Excel background to kind of step into her role. So I trained very quickly into underwriting and, understanding some of the mechanisms to quoting. And when she went out of town, a broker called to review a proposal. And I was kind of still very green, very new, but I understood Excel. So what I did is I'm like, well, let's look here. I went behind and kind of figured out the formulas and figured out what a basis must be for a per script per contract, what we must be using. And so as I was explaining this proposal to a broker, he's like, well, can you explain that to my client? And it was a natural fit for me to say, oh, sure, I would love to go meet a client. I had a meeting before technically my boss said you should go to a meeting. I was just very excited to go to a meeting. So, I was young, and it just allowed me to not only get the numbers, but speak to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why I've loved the sales side so much, is because I don't believe, especially in PBM, we're not selling a widget, right? You're selling conceptual, you're selling, trend, you're selling how to improve things moving forward. You have to understand what goes into the numbers.
Yeah. Well, I love that story. It was almost like your moment arrived. It seems like you were prepared, right? And it wasn't something like, oh, you had a planned call. Somebody calls you out of the blue and you're like, well, I got to figure this out.
Yeah,
and it happened to be a serendipitous moment in your career, it sounds like.
And I always joke, I was so young. I mean, I was early 20s. I was fresh out of college. To me, a meeting meant probably going to Express and buying a business outfit.
Yeah.
I was sure I needed a briefcase. Don't know what I was putting in my briefcase. But it really was like, this is what I want to do. I want to go to meetings.
Yeah.
I wish I could talk to 25-year-old Rachel about going to meetings and her excitement, because that's all we do nowadays.
I know. I kind of miss it, though. Like, it's funny. The meeting is like an event, right?
It
You
is.
mentioned the suit. You get prepped for it. You have your coffee. You plan your meal. And all of it is part of the. I don't know. It's almost like a. I don't know, performance isn't necessarily the right word, but it is. It's what you do. That is an event to a degree. So I miss it. I miss it so much. I'm getting out now. We had our last in-person meeting last week with the broker here in town. So that was, oh my God, to drive and plan and look at the map and where am I going? Felt so good. So what is the point of today, right? We know what self-funded with Spencer is. We're talking about all the moving parts. The one we haven't really dived deep into yet is a PBM. So what is a PBM, Rachel?
Sure. So a pharmacy benefit manager, we speak in so many acronyms in this industry, and here we are, yet another one. A PBM is essentially the entity that processes prescription drugs. When you go to the pharmacy, the PBM is the entity they're billing. I don't have the exact statistic, but I believe it's in the high 90th percentile of most claims processed in this country today through a pharmacy go through a PBM in some capacity, whether you are under an insured plan, or a self-funded plan, which is what we're talking about, group-sponsored health plans, or even the individual market, where people may not have insurance, but they could be using a discount card. And what most people don't realize is even those discount cards, GoodRx, anything you're using with some kind of channel for a price is going through a PBM.
Okay. So a PBM, pharmacy benefit manager, right? You said we love our acronyms. Is it safe to say you're essentially doing the role of what the TPA does for medical, but you guys are carving out and solely doing the prescription piece? Is that
is
close
correct?
enough?
So
Okay.
it ties well into a TPA, because a PBM, one of our responsibilities is contracting with a network, right? I mean, I know in TPA world we can get into non-network, and there's a lot of complicated new worlds out there. But for PBM, there is a network. You've got to have the ability for the pharmacy to bill the claim, and the PBM is the one negotiating the price of that medication.
Okay, so the PBM's negotiating the price, and I don't know why, even being in this world for so long, medical seemed to be the thing that I focused on so much. Like, and then this PBM piece was almost like, I don't know much about it. I've heard there's some really expensive drugs over here, but like, I'm going to ignore this piece. And so selfishly, I'm very excited to go like really in the weeds on this, because it's also, I'm hearing more and more that future looking, kind of claims projections that PBMs that the RX spend might make up 50% of a plan spend or
that is
more.
Correct.
Okay. Is that what you're?
I mean,
you're
was
the expert, right?
It was for so long, even before we were, I guess, fashionable. 10, 12 years ago, PBM was creeping up into premiums, even on the fully insured side. I mean, PBM was starting to represent 20 to 25% of the premium, I think, before anybody had a second to really pay attention to it. And now that, you know, it's pretty common to see pharmacy to be about a third of the cost of the healthcare pie. And, you know, as we continue to talk this morning, I'm sure we'll get into what that third looks like. And when you can shave off some of that third, you can really start to contain cost of the overall package.
Well, yeah, I mean, just do the math, right? If people always talk about, you know, the plan spend overall for your health plan on a group health plan is the second or third biggest line item for an employer. Well, if a third of that second or third biggest line item is RX, well, clearly that's a big chunk of money that you can address.
And it's not just money, Spencer, it's also, you have to consider, it's the most utilized benefit, right? Even though it may not be the biggest price tag, it's the one that impacts people the most.
So do you think and I guess we'll probably get into this, you know, naturally through the conversation, but I'm curious, that uptick where prescription is making up a bigger portion of the pie, is it frequency? Or is it more severity of claims that you think?
So if you asked me this a year ago, I would have told you it was the latter. It was the severity of claims coming out, the new, you know, the advancements in medicine, biotechnology, specialty drugs. But what we saw for the first time last year was an uptick in utilization.
Really?
I think that, yeah, I mean, we're just looking at our trends for 2020 now. And as we're analyzing, it seems like, and I don't have the specific numbers for our book, but I think we're going to find healthcare was used like crazy in the last 12 months.
Really? And you think it's just, I'm trying to think about why that do you think it was because people were more likely to seek a prescription in a virtual environment than actually go seek?
100%.
Okay.
Telemedicine is changing. It is going to be, telemedicine, I'm very interested to see what that does to the, you know, and when we look back at claims, I mean, it's going to be low claims, right? Because you aren't obviously having testing done. But I can tell you telemedicine is going to play a huge role because it's easy to get a script when you're looking at a doctor on your iPhone, you know, FaceTiming.
Yeah, and I think, it's not like he can perform a procedure or a test, like you said, virtually. So the only really natural result of that is a prescription, unless you have to come in now based on their advice. So, okay, that's the first time I've heard that, but it makes logical sense to me.
Yeah, and we're seeing it in our numbers. I can tell you, we for sure saw an uptick in the average script per member last year for utilization. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm actually going to have to investigate this further because that's the first time I've heard of it, but it makes total sense, right? And I think before we get too far in the weeds, I want to make sure that we talk specifically about EHIM, right? Because you mentioned 35 years of existence out of Detroit. What does EHIM stand for, since we're talking acronyms?
So my favorite, I'm so glad you said EHIM and didn't make us EHIM, because we're actually a woman-owned company. Our CEO and founder, her name is Mindy Fink, and technically then we'd be EHER, right? If that was the acronym. But Employee Health Insurance Management, founded 35 years ago. And our story is very different than every PBM you could talk to, at least so far in my knowledge. I'm waiting for another PBM to step forward and say that they're similar in how we're structured. But essentially, you know, our story, and to simplify it, is basically when our CEO set up EHIM to be a pharmacy benefit manager, you know, PBMs, we work with what's called a BIN number.
Okay.
And a BIN number is what's on your ID card. If you have health insurance, those of you listening, you'll have this number on your ID card. That's essentially what tells a pharmacy who they're billing, right? It's like a SKU, if you will. It directs the claim to the correct provider. And when we got this BIN number, you know, we hadn't processed a single claim yet. This was in the very, very beginning. Mindy showed up on a call list, probably from a salesperson at what's called a rebate aggregation firm. Okay. And essentially, they were ready to pay her a fixed dollar amount per claim for every claim she would process. Couple bucks, you know, hey, we see your, you know, we want to help you and pay you a few dollars a claim. And Mindy, whose previous career, you know, she worked at a doctor's office, had a lot of exposure to pharmaceutical companies from that side of the house, kind of felt uncomfortable with this. And she said, well, what are you paying me for? I haven't even done anything yet. And they're like, well, we want to control your formulary. We want the ability to tell you, you know, what medication should be covered, excluded, and, you know, and we'll track your data for you and handle it. And at that point, Mindy kind of took a step back and said, no way. Because if you're going to pay me to tell me what drugs, then there was no efficacy involved. It had nothing to do with what her medical team would recommend. And it kind of seemed like it would be manipulating what claims patients would have access to. And so what makes our world very, very different in the perspective I speak from is we have remained independent of pharma, which is not the norm in the PBM industry. Just to speak on our firm, at this point today, we do not nor have we ever taken a single rebate dollar. We don't give rebates as part of our plan. It means we're not the right PBM for every group.
Sure.
We know who our correct group is, but it's a different approach to managing claims. And so much of this industry is unfortunately manipulated behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And that's why PBM is such an interesting entity, because you don't always know what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, I think that's why I was saying I sort of stayed away from diving too deep, because it seemed like such a convoluted space. And it seemed like like you're saying, there's so much, I would say, pork built into the transaction itself, that how many entities are siphoning off dollars in that transaction, even unnecessarily so, I'd say. They just get inserted into the process, and then, we'll take some money out of that. And it's like, what is actually going on? It seems, I don't know if collusion's the right word, or, not going to imply illegality.
I was going to say, whatever it is completely legal. And, it's interesting, because when Mindy started EHIM, it was right around the era where Washington was taking a huge hit at pharma and really paying attention to the power pharma had over doctors, and the, paying physicians, sending them on trips and rewarding them for writing their product. And that, really became widespread as known as a bad thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The pharma got smacked and basically said, you have to stop. There's no more rebating of doctors. You cannot pay them. They got creative. I mean, we still have a pharmaceutical rep industry today. But what nobody really did then was follow to the next obvious place, which is the payer side. And I think Mindy, when she started EHIM, she was confident this was coming, right? I mean, there was no way she thought rebates would be part of the payer side, because it was so frowned upon on the provider side.
Well, can you explain rebates? Because that actually was my next question. Rebating and we don't give rebates, or we give rebates. Like, there's not a consensus of what's right, correct?
So to define rebates in our industry, it's easy to think of a rebate. You think you go to Best Buy, you buy a TV, and you kind of get that check back after you buy the TV that you are, as a consumer, choosing to send in your consumer information. With pharma, rebates are essentially marketing dollars. They're dollars paid, they're ruminations, or money that's exchanged for increasing utilization of their own product. Okay. So rebates are contracts. They can be at the PBM level. They can be, on the wholesaler side. There's a lot of places the rebate contracts are created. But what I need everyone to hear is they're not free money. It's, pharmaceutical companies are not benevolent and just real geeked that you're using their product, Spencer. Sure. And they're like, you know what? They used our drug. That's so nice. Yeah. Let's give them some money, because our drugs are expensive. They're marketing dollars. They are basically a pharmaceutical company, and to simplify this, contracting with a PBM, saying, we see you dispense X amount of our product. We will pay you Y if you get us X plus percentage next quarter. It's a marketing, it's almost like a commission that the PBM is earning to push a drug out onto the product. And how a PBM does that is through formulary. So for the listeners out there, even in your own life where you've seen a drug that you used to pay a preferred copay on, next year it's non-preferred, the year after it's not covered altogether, these are all mechanisms behind the scenes of what a PBM has contracted for with pharma.
So the formulary is a defined list of drugs that go into certain categories. Is that correct?
That is correct. Exactly.
Okay. And so, again, going back on this notion that, pharmaceutical companies aren't necessarily benevolent in their approach. Not necessarily, it's, again, not suggesting anything untoward, but, okay, so we're incentivizing people to take certain drugs that might have higher margins, might, increase utilization. Maybe they have properties in which the frequency of the drug is higher, so they're going to take it more often. So they're steering for their own benefit. Is that
100%?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's pharmaceutical companies have a product they're trying to sell, and rebates are a way to sell it.
Okay. All right. Well, now I think I understand. So I want to hear then the converse of that. So you guys don't take rebates. Talk to me about that independence, or why you guys have maintained that neutrality for so long.
So we believe, rebates are not on the low-cost medications as a rule, right? They're not going to be on a medication that's, at Walmart, just to plug a Walmart $4 generic, right? They're going to be on the latest and greatest. We call them, I guess this is where you're a woman-owned business, we call them the designer drugs, because they're typically not, or Me Too is, some of the medications have been known in the industry. They're medications that are just tweaks on older formulas. Oftentimes, they're not necessarily miracles of science. That's not to say rebates aren't sometimes on brand new drugs, because they are. But what we have found as a rule is when you are accepting a rebate, you are essentially pushing that drug no matter what. And that no matter what means there might be a lower costing alternative that should go through before that drug. And so in our world, we have felt it's a true conflict of interest if our business model is set up to promote lowest net cost, make sure that the most efficacious cost medication is going through. We can't have someone else dictating to us what that is.
Well, that's what I appreciate. And you always hear the notion of an independent PBM. Now, I think I have a better understanding of what that independence actually looks like. And I think it'd be difficult to argue the other side of the lack of independence. I mean, you probably, obviously, after 20 years are familiar with the counter argument would be to that, right?
So I have not been able to logically have a counter argument to what we do unless it's the employer. You know, I always say we're not right for every employer.
Yeah.
We are right for an employer, and we'll talk about it as we get in, that has a lot of specialty that needs to be managed. We're right for the employer that's wanting to be creative, right? This is the employer that's looking at all different kind of funding mechanisms, reference-based pricing, really gets creative. Or third, has a high generic utilization, really high, because generic utilization means there's not a lot of rebates to begin with. They're already getting the lower net cost, and the rebates aren't part of their pie. The employer group, though, that wants what they want when they want it, right? This is the employer group that doesn't care that pill is purple and glitter and, it's the exact same thing as something that's white and boring, but they want that purple glitter pill because, they saw it on TV. Mm-hmm. They need the rebates. They're going to need them to offset, choices that they're making.
I think you've referenced it a couple times. What is that kind of famous example of a repackaging of a drug that's it's like Tylenol and something else, but then it's $3,500 if you get it from a pharmacy rather than just buying Tylenol.
So I think what you're talking about is on the hospital side.
Okay,
and that's a totally, hospital pharmacy, that's a whole other, that's another, I think, podcast that you can host because I think pharmacy in the hospital systems is a different thing. I do think it's gotten better because of media exposure to the pricing. But when we're talking repackaging, we're talking about, where the drug is acquired from, if it went through a wholesaler, but the PBM should be universally pricing their medication so it doesn't matter where the drug came from when the consumer or the plan sponsor are paying for it.
I agree. And so I guess let me ask this next question then, because I think it's kind of what we're talking about, traditional versus pass-through. What does that mean?
So again, this continues on. I love the rabbit hole we're going down. We're going deeper and deeper.
I'm educating myself, and I'm hoping everybody else is learning along the way.
PBMs so essentially what happened is years and years and years ago, PBMs were never upfront with how we were paid. And I want to say this, I am an employee of a pharmacy benefit manager. I love my job. I am glad we make money because that's what employs me.
Of course.
Unfortunately, in the beginning of the era, PBMs never really disclosed how PBMs made money. And whether that's right or wrong, I'm not here to say, but because there was no tie-in to what the PBMs were earning, at some point as pharmacy costs started escalating and snowballing, I think it took a consultant, I think this was probably when third-party administrators started becoming more transparent also with administrative fees and, weren't padding claims because, spread pricing and medical claims became frowned upon for obvious reasons. And so the next obvious place to look was, well, what's happening with pharmacy? Are these pharmacy benefit managers padding claims and the consumer's not really, and when I say consumer, I mean the health plan, are they paying what the drug actually costs, or are they paying more than the drug actually costs?
That is, you mentioned spread pricing.
Yeah,
that's
spread pricing was the traditional model. Now, is that right or wrong? Today everybody frowns upon traditional models, and I get why, but it just needed to be honest that was there. And I think for those of you listening, there's still traditional models exist today. And the key difference between a traditional model and a pass-through or a transparent model is if the PBM is telling you how they're getting paid. And the easiest way to find this is on your ASA agreement with a pharmacy benefit manager. Are they giving you a per employee per month fee or a per transaction fee? Are you paying anything fixed for your PBM services? And if you have $0, big old goose egg in all of your fee columns, you got to know they're making money, right?
Yeah.
So where are they getting paid? And that's kind of the big difference as opposed to a PBM, like EHIM, we offer a fixed fee. This is our, per contract fee, our per transaction fee, and this is, how we make our money.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's straightforward, right? I mean, it's easy to understand, and I think that's why I get frustrated is because I've seen before on spreadsheets where the projected cost for pharmaceutical was negative when you included rebates. And you're like, well, you're obviously making money. You're not giving money back. You're not netting negative dollars on this process. So how are you making money in that model? Well, obviously, like you said, it's either spread pricing or God knows how many other places.
I want it to be clear. I believe we do a job, and PBM should get paid.
Of course.
It's just how. And I think when you, I've heard arguments, especially as the pass-through transparent era began. It is crazy. I don't know what any other industry. You can't go into a clothing store, buy a shirt, even if it's on sale, and then say to, the manager, I want to know how much you're making on this shirt. If I'm paying $12 or $20 for this shirt, what is your margin that you're making?
Yeah.
But because the PBM industry has been so murky, we've lost our right, I think, as an industry to be able to say, you don't get the right to know what we're making. And now they do.
Well, that's, they say sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? So it's like exposure, transparency is this, everybody's talking transparency in every corner of our industry right now. I mean, the last administration made it part of what they did, whether you agree with them politically or not. I don't think anybody should disagree with transparency. I understand we all have a business to run, like you suggested. Everybody needs to make money, otherwise we're not in business. But I think everybody is focused on, well, what is the fair or appropriate amount of money for you to make, which is really all anybody expects to do. If there's an unfair or hidden or an exorbitant fee that you're making, and you're also maybe protected by some lobbying or protected by some other, behind the scenes contracts that 100%. You put in play, that's a bad thing. I think we can all agree that that's a bad thing. So we're just finding the places where the sunlight needs to shine and exposing those parts individually, right? I don't think, though, our industry is notorious for pushing back against that and using government sometimes to push back against that. So I don't think it's going to just, oh, yeah, sure, we'll show you everything now. Our bad. So there'll be some pushback, obviously. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that.
I mean, I think it's amazing. I think that you're 100% right. I don't know why transparency isn't a good thing for every industry, in our healthcare space, to speak to. And I'm hoping with this transparency comes the exposure with rebates. And again, not speaking political at all, but this last administration did begin to shed some light on rebates. And really, they were looking at in the Medicare, Medicaid space and how rebates were impacting prices of medications and, should they be there, should they not be there? And it's now being talked about. So I'm
that's a good thing, right?
Conversation continues.
We're adding to the conversation right now. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the coordination of claims, because I know one of the things, especially as a stop-loss guy, and my biases are always going to shine on these podcasts, but I remember, if there was an independent TPA that was working on behalf of the medical claims, then you have an independent PBM that's coordinating that. Sometimes there's a difficulty of the coordination of those claims per member for the stop-loss carrier. So talk to me about what you guys do in working with those outside TPAs to make sure the claims are getting there.
It's all about fluid communication, and it's all about not siloing partnerships, right? It's even though we have our own lane, right? I'm a PBM, we stay in our lane. A TPA is going to stay in their lane. We have to communicate with each other. We have to make sure that if it's a claim that could go through pharmacy, that the TPA is communicating with the PBM channel to see if that's the path that makes the most sense. It also means that if a PBM is not covering a claim for a certain reason, the TPA understands that it's not a covered claim. Because what can happen, and we've seen happen through the years, is where we have denied a claim for whatever reason, right? Clinical, obviously, is taken into hand with specialty drugs. And the next place that the member goes is to the third-party administrator. And then they figure out a way to get it billed medically, which, by the way, is sometimes double, 3 times, 4 times the price of even what we just denied. And because of that lack of communication, a claim slips through that shouldn't have gone through. So I think that the key is communication. I always say we are brought in with TPAs through a consultant or broker channel.
A TPA is usually bringing you to the table?
At some point, yes. I think through the years now there's definitely some TPAs that have befriended EHIM, understand what we do. The transparency era has helped tremendously because TPAs are not, really shouldn't be earning rebate revenue anymore. So, it's kind of like they should be pretty vendor agnostic. And, I always say when a consultant brings us to a TPA that they like and they basically, marry us together, I always joke that now we got to fall in love because it's an arranged marriage. Yeah. But if we don't, air quote, fall in love, then we can't partner. We can't really be working together. So for those of you listening who have, I think going to best-in-class partners and piecing together your health plan. My husband's a broker. He always compares it to, Cold Stone Creamery or one of those ice cream shops where you marble slab. You pick your flavors. You know what you want. You got the ice cream, and you kind of put in all your mixings to make that perfect ice cream scoop for the employer that gives them all the flavors. And he's going to love that I'm using his example. But I think that you've got to make sure it tastes good. Yeah. You've got to make sure that everybody's connecting with each other. Otherwise, you've just got a bunch of siloed entities and you're not delivering with the best possible way.
Well, and that would be something that I also, to piggyback on what you're saying from the broker perspective, right, is keep in mind, let's say a member has, get technical for a second with stop loss. You get $100,000 stop loss deductible. You got $70,000 in medical claims for that member. That member might also have $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in prescription claims. If you're not coordinating those two together and aligning that with the member's claims experience, the stop loss vendor might not be aware that there's a spec claim. You might be going, well, why am I not being reimbursed as the employer? There's also filing windows, which some stop loss carriers will deny if they're not notified within a certain amount of time. So as a broker, one of the things that I want to stress the importance of those folks that maybe haven't carved out the pieces before. Make sure that there's a coordination of the claims reporting between those two entities. I see you nodding. Yeah,
because I could come up with stories, of course. I mean, I've been doing this a long time.
Can you share maybe one of the worst horror stories that comes to mind?
I've already given kind of an example. It's the old Wizard of Oz. I don't know if you remember the scene where Dorothy's like, which way do we go? And the Scarecrow's pointing both ways. Yeah. It's kind of like that when a stop loss wants to see who should have paid for something or who didn't or who would. And everyone's like, well, they paid for it. No, they should have paid for it. We shouldn't have paid for it. They shouldn't have paid for it. You got to talk, right? And that's, I think, that story was a very real example. We've had times where we have denied a claim only to find out that the TPA approved it. And it was like, what are you doing? Yeah. And especially, we'll probably get to this. And, if we're not, I'm bringing it up because it's an important thing for plan sponsors to hear, which is strategies on specialty drugs, right? If you're hiring, EHIM, I believe we're the pioneers in strategizing specialty drug programs. We've been doing them for more than 15 years. Before people knew about them, we were doing them quietly and disciplinedly and out of Detroit. And now that it's a norm, you see all kinds of carve-out solutions, carve-out specialty, work with different providers, which is great. We do it in-house, so I have to plug our company just because it's an all-in-one solution. But it doesn't mean these carve-out companies aren't great when you have a PBM that cannot do, the services that, in-house. But if you've got that strategy in place where they're going after, maybe a member can't afford a certain drug and they're going after a drug deferral program, but, these pharmaceutical companies will call the TPA and say, well, hey, we want it to go through medical. If the TPA doesn't know the strategy you have in place and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, they can get this through the hospital. Boom.
Okay, I didn't even know that was the case, so I'm glad that you brought this up. That's something that's even, that's a totally different problem that I hadn't considered, right? And you said sometimes it can be 3, 4, 5 times what the drug would have been if it had been adjudicated through you.
Because then you're getting facility charges, you're getting, there's all other pieces.
Oh, specialty medication. I'm sure we could dedicate an entire episode to specialty medication. I do want to talk about it a bit, but before we get into that, like if I'm a broker and I'm kind of like, hey, I don't know what I need and I don't know what to look for, but I know I want to move a client self-funded. As a PBM representative, that's somebody passionate about this, been 2 decades almost now, what should I look for? What are the things that I need to consider?
The right client, first of all. The client that you have to educate the client and understand, because self-funding is not meant to be a one-year saving solution, right? It's meant to be the long haul and really it's a way to insulate the plan for years to come, get an idea of what's happening behind the curtain, really be able to start to control costs and understand you are going to have some years that are going to go up and you'll make up for it after that. But I think the keys is just understanding, using services to find out what kind of conditions are going in with your group. I know there's companies like Rover Analytics that are doing. I got to give shout out, to Ben somewhere who's hopefully listening. But companies out there that are looking to see, what's going on behind the curtain, be aware of conditions, and really not be afraid of them. Know that there could be strategies if there's a high cost claimant. Well,
that's some of the things that I've become aware of recently, but I've never seen happen in the real world is, aren't there some programs where members, you can kind of like get a member through some sort of government program? Can you explain how that happens?
Sure. So, the bottom line is that in a self-funded space, an employer does not have to cover everything under the sun, right? And you are able in some cases to set up your program so that if a member does qualify for certain medications, you can go after those programs. And we in our space have, really tried to work within that mindset and looking towards setting plan designs up so that if we know that there are these foundation programs, manufacturer programs, alternatives to source it off the plan, we set it up right away from a plan design perspective.
Cool.
And what you're seeing employers saving hundreds of thousands of dollars on very expensive medications that the plan is not getting hit with.
Well, and do you think it's just there's a lack of awareness, or why is that not being more utilized? Or are there only so many dollars that are out there for that program?
It's not being utilized because what's my word that we've spent so much time talking about?
Transparency?
It starts with an R.
Oh, R, rebates.
Bingo.
Okay.
So a lot of these rebates out there that are very profitable, even if they're given back to a plan sponsor in some capacity, are in specialty drugs. I mean, that's where the money is at, right?
Yeah.
And so if you are a PBM and you are making all this money from Humira, it is in your vested interest to get that Humira in the pockets of people.
Yeah.
We've heard from Intel in our space that rebates also affect prior authorizations. Rebates require a PBM to dispense a certain number of medications, regardless of prior authorization requirements.
Oh.
So, when you hear in your seat, in stop loss, you're hearing prior authorization, you're thinking, oh, this is great. The PBM is going to put in a mechanism. They're going to try to, mitigate risk, and they're going to really get in there and evaluate the claim. But I'm telling you that a drug like a Humira may have a 90% requirement or approval rating of a carrier. So if Humira is basically saying, part of our contract, Spencer, is we are going to give you money, but you better approve 90% of every Humira that hits your desk.
Yeah.
You've now entered into a rubber stamp situation. Is this a human patient? Yes. Is it a human doctor? This sounds great. Go get your, $3,000 to $5,000 a month.
I was going to ask,
medication.
how much is it?
Humira can cost $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 depending on dose.
Oh gosh. Well, that leads me into the last question, and I know I don't want to put you in a situation where you got to think too hard about some instances, but I kept hearing about $1 million drugs,
sure.
$2 million drugs, scary, huge numbers out there. They're orphan drugs, right? Where it's does that mean the only drug that treats that particular?
It's the only drug, and there probably won't be competition because it's such a finite number of people that have that. It's we call those in our world the needle in a haystack drug, right?
Okay.
It's that, and we had one at EHIM recently, but it's like when there's 10 people a year diagnosed, or, I'm simplifying, but so, what we're becoming aware of, and again, we stay in our lane, so I want to say that I'm not a stop-loss guru, nor do I represent a carrier, but we have become aware of funding mechanisms that some of the carriers are putting in place so that if there is a medication like that, an employer may be able to set up a per member per month type funding mechanism from a stop-loss standpoint to be able to protect the plan should a claim like that hit.
Okay.
It's almost like a secondary coverage.
What is the most expensive drug that you're seeing nowadays? Is there?
Now you're making me open my phone because I need to get the name. The one that I think we saw.
Zolgensma?
Zolgensma, yeah,
okay.
which is a $2 million per time for that medication. And
how frequently is that administered?
That I don't know.
Okay,
I think
that's okay.
It might be once a year. I don't know the frequency.
That's what I said.
do know
I didn't
that
intentionally
it's for no, it's a single dose. Payment solutions are necessary. So it is for, just to say what it's for. It's for children less than 2 years of age with spinal muscle atrophy. So I can't imagine it's many times because it's limited until you're 2. But $2
million.
$2 million. Yep.
It's terrifying, right? And I think that's what I always try to emphasize to brokers I was working with that got so fixated on fixed costs of stop loss. It's like, well, why are you charging me this? Why is my renewal? It's like, do you not understand the severity of these claims that are out here that you cannot predict? And
the other, thing that we're becoming aware of is some carriers have developed an annuity type model. So that's another thing. Or kind of a risk sharing for covering these multi-million-dollar drugs. So I've
got to dig into that a little bit.
That's something. Again, you asked the one question that I needed to. It's okay.
I can't have them all softballs.
If everybody you have on the show claims they know everything, then that's not exciting, right? That's one area that I'm still learning about.
Okay.
All I can say is from our space, what we do is we are constantly maintaining the pulse on the ground and making sure that if there are solutions we can put in play, like the sourcing of medications or leveraging manufacturer programs, that's what we're going to put in.
Well, and there's other than the government programs, aren't there ones where you can maybe source medication outside of the U.S.? I mean, is that because there was always a gray area that I understood of whether or not that actually was legal?
Yeah. So in our space, again, I'm not going to speak to any legalities of anything. We are aware of, so from an importation standpoint, we do have clients. Again, EHIM is headquartered in Detroit, which is, a good 25 minutes from the border of Canada. We have had international importation as part of our, offerings for probably 20 plus years, just because of where we're based. And, a lot of government entities used to take advantage of those programs for years. We didn't and still do not, for the most part, do that with specialty drugs. Our CEO has evaluated the either importing of specialty drugs or flying somebody, to the Cayman Islands to get a medication. Yeah. And when we've evaluated those programs as a whole versus what we've been able to do from strategy standpoints, it hasn't financially made sense. So it's just not something, we as a rule in our block of business have been able to not need to offer that kind of a solution because it is gray. There are so many questions, specialty drugs can get stopped at the border. We've heard that happening. There's climate control with those medications. Yeah. And these aren't $300-400 whoopsies. These are thousands of dollar whoopsies that can happen at the border.
Yeah, and the whole idea of like the medical or prescription tourism, I mean, of course, as a member level, if Sally's like, oh, I get to have a trip once a quarter to the Cayman Islands, that sounds amazing. Sure, I'll go get my drug there. But, the complexity and the logistics of that, and like you just mentioned.
And the fairness to other employees, and I.
Why does she get a vacation? I want to be on that drug.
I got to tell you, Mindy, who's kind of a mama bear at our company, she thinks through all of these things. And, it's just, we've been able to have the trend we've had doing the way we've done it. That doesn't mean it doesn't work. And sometimes, and again, I think that in this conversation and for the listeners there who are, looking at different PBMs and, trying to figure out who the right PBM is, there's now one right PBM for every client. At the end of the day, I believe passionately seeing the numbers. I think every PBM, if you get to brass tacks and you get all the crap out of there. I was trying to come up with a ladylike term to keep this a PG-friendly show. When you get all this stuff out of there and you really get to the pricing and the plan design, we're all between 3 and 4%. I mean, every single one of us. I don't care if you're a big PBM, Caremark, Express Scripts, the like, or you're a boutique PBM like EHIM. We are all within the same couple percentage points.
Okay.
The question is, what is the intent of the employer? Right? Do you have the employer who's going to override every purple glitter pill because the CEO's wife has to have it? Or is this a group we need to save money at all costs, do whatever it takes?
Yeah.
Because it's going to matter based on the management of the pharmacy plan. You can't just plug one in, plug in another, and think we're all the same. And so I think that's where, with international sourcing and all these different things, some things may be right for certain employers, and I think it's a responsibility of anybody listening to know all these solutions are out there and to figure out which works.
That's the approach that I've taken with this podcast so far is, of course, I get the choice of who I invite on and the companies that I hear about are doing good things. But I'm agnostic, right? Like I want you to be able to come on, explain the space, get to obviously be the expert on this particular topic. Talk about your company, of course, but it's up to the listener to decide whether or not it's appropriate, whether they agree. That's okay if you disagree. I've already had a second TPA rep come on and talk about a little bit different of what they're doing. So, I mean, I want this just to be a conversation that's not neutral. There's an element of bias, but that's okay because you're a representative of a company. And, of course, you talk well about them. Same with my company. I'm going to do the same thing. But, to the degree that there's an educational aspect that outweighs the sales component of it, and let the listener decide, if it's right or not. So I don't think this will be a hard question, but we'll kind of move towards wrapping up and get you on your way. The future of the industry. I always want to ask from your seat what you think the future holds for PBMs.
It's a complicated question because I love my job.
Yeah.
Look, I think we need more transparency. And that word is used ad nauseum, man. I hate it, but it's in the PBM space, there has to be more understanding. We got to a place where there's, it is fashionable now to be a pass-through transparent PBM, but nobody's looking at other contracts behind the scenes. And again, it does unfortunately get back to rebates and rebate aggregation. How aware are you of the power your PBM has to move within, a formulary and make changes as things evolve? So I think the future of our industry is going to be more light shown. I think that we're going to see more, unfortunately, of Washington getting involved and Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. I think we're going to see more, price transparency. They're kind of a competitor, but I'm going to say, I think GoodRx has really shown a light onto the price discrepancies between pharmacies. Mm-hmm. I think that's going to continue to, move down that rabbit hole of what do drugs really cost and what is the price for the payer and how to get to the lowest possible place.
Do you see technology being infused in this space as well?
Yes.
How so? Was it apps on your phone or, what's tech doing?
I think tech is getting more member specific, right? I mean, you're going to start seeing tracking of how often you fill your scripts and, little reminders of, did you know you could get your drug cheaper here? But it's all about who's powering that. And unfortunately, that even in that, what I just explained, can be manipulated, right? And I think hopefully as technology evolves, transparency stays with it because they have to be together.
Well, yeah, what's that adage that if something's free, you're the product? So if somebody's giving you drips of notifications, you're the one that's actually making them money by these choices that you're making, even though it seems like, there's a benevolent recommendation for something. It's rarely ever the case.
It's the cards you get in the mail. I mean, I'm in this business, and I can't tell you how many free drug cards I get in the mail. Yep. And it's like, why does this company want to make sure I get my prescriptions for free? Because that company is selling the data of what prescriptions I take, and now pharma somewhere now has a bullseye on me to know what to target me with if they want me to take a competitive product.
The targeted advertisement and marketing is crazy. I mean, I gave in one yesterday. Actually, I'm on Instagram, right? You get all these, everybody wants to sell me stretchy work pants that I can squat in. And I'm like, I don't need those. But eventually
you do, though.
After exposure. But no, I do. I actually do. But no, there was a t-shirt, and I've seen this dang t-shirt 10 times. That's a cool t-shirt. Finally, they got me, but it was just the exposure, right? It's crazy. Free advertising.
I'm glad, because I always joke that I'm why the internet's free. Because of those Instagram. So you're welcome because of the internet.
Yeah. And now that I mention on here, and I think I turned my phone off, but I don't know. Maybe my phone is listening, and I'm going to start getting other targeted ads.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
But anyway, so let's wrap it up. Anything you want to leave the listener with, and or, where can they find you? Definitely want to make sure they can get a hold of you.
Sure. Well, I'm definitely findable on LinkedIn. Rachel Strauss. You can find me with EHIM. But I think that hopefully this began to just start the question marks in your head to ask the questions. I'm not here to pick on any individual PBM. Just know what kind of PBM you do business with, and know if that's the PBM you want to continue doing business with, how to continue to make them better and really perform the best they possibly can for your client.
Well, I can say, and I mean this totally truthfully, this has been one of the most fascinating episodes for me. Very, very enlightening. And again, selfishly, I get to choose who comes on, so I get to learn. But you're fantastic as well, and I really appreciate you joining me. Nice to meet you in person.
Likewise.
After the 4-year-old recommendation of the Magic Merlin Sleep Suit. So again, thanks for coming on, Rachel, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye.